Hi, this is the organizer that you're going to use to fill out the 3Gs, so you might want to preview the questions and get the sheet out as you're watching this narration. European exploration. How and why did it start? We're going to look at the motivation of the explorers and some of the trials that they experienced on their voyage, but the purpose of this mainly is to focus on how and why exploration started. So let's continue. So how did these items create the need for a new trade route? So you see spices, you see nutmeg, you see salt, cinnamon, ginger, a variety of these spices. Fortunately for Europeans and Asians, these were not located in Europe. So for Asia, they were able to make quite a bit of money and profit selling these items, because these items particularly were sold in Asia. And these were spices that were used to season foods. Back then, they did not have refrigeration. We take for granted that today we can go into our refrigerator and just get what we need. It's there, it's available, it's ready to eat. Back then, they didn't have that luxury. And without refrigeration, they needed salts to cure their meat and preserve them, and sometimes they needed some of the spices to cover up the foul taste, as before the meat actually turned bad, it started to taste bad before it actually turned bad and you couldn't eat it. So oftentimes they would use those spices to season their meats and foods to aid the taste. So that's why those spices were so prized and in high demand in Asia. But in Europe, they did not have those, so they had to travel great distances to get them. So what's the big deal about no refrigeration? Again, these foods were highly valued. They were food preservatives. By the early 1500s, Europeans came to the Spice Islands, and again, in Asia, mainly to search for cloves and nutmegs. And they had done that because the Muslims had already been trading with Asians for a period of time, and so they knew that those items were located in Asia. Wealthy ladies used to keep spices in their lockets. It was not only to help them freshen their breath, but they could also add nutmeg to foods and drinks to spice it up a little bit. They used spices for medicine or medicinal purposes as well. Again, to relieve colic, which is indigestion. Oftentimes babies have colic, gout, and rheumatism. And they also used those spices for a variety of other things. But for the most part, you get the general idea that these spices were in great demand. They were located in Asia, and because of the great demand for them, and we've already learned in economics, when you have a great demand for something and a short supply, it increases the price. So the price of these items were incredibly expensive. So you see here, these are where the Spice Islands were located relative to Europe. So you see now modern day Malaysia and Indonesia is where most of these spices were located. And remember, Europeans were not going by ocean at this point. They were traveling by land. And you can imagine the time and effort it took to get these. And oftentimes they were trading with not only Asians, but Muslims to get these items. So this is what you kind of see. And again, they were going through the Mediterranean, but again, mostly by land. And you can see some of these choke points with which we addressed when we were talking about geography, that sometimes these could be choked off, but you see the Silk Road in blue here, if you can see up here. Oftentimes that was by land, but a lot of these areas were traveled and occupied by other empires. And so that necessitated Europeans to go through several different countries and areas and territories in order to get these items. So transporting these goods across long distances was very costly. Everyone along the way had to be paid, and everybody wanted a piece of the profit. By the time these items reached Europe, obviously you can imagine the price was significantly higher than if they would have gone directly to Asians. And here's our monopoly man. Way too many middlemen. So what factors were pushing Europeans to explore? Well, you can imagine, again, not only was it the distance and the high price of the goods, but there were some other things and factors going on also. Europeans, especially Spain and Portugal, wanted to find a water route to Asia and Africa. If they could cut out these middlemen, then they know that they could reduce the price quite a bit and cut out some of these people that were increasing the price. They were also upset with our little friends in Italy because the Italian merchants in Venice and Genoa were controlling. They would come up through the Mediterranean Sea in Genoa and Venice, and they were controlling all of that trade through the Mediterranean Sea to go north to into Europe. So they were also controlling the trade along with the Muslims. So again, this was upsetting the other countries, and for the most part it was Spain and Portugal, England, and some other country in France as well. But those are the countries that were really suffering because of the control. And you see where Genoa and Venice are located. Okay, so as a result, and the other thing that was going on at the time, about 1453, we had religious holy wars, and there were differences between religions. Christian crusades came and declared war on Muslims. Obviously, this did not bode well for the trading, and Muslims would oftentimes cut off trade routes between Europe and Asia. And so that not only would that short supply, it would kind of sometimes eliminate supply altogether, which obviously would increase price. And as you see, my little money tree. The causes of exploration, the 3 G's are gold, glory, and God. Now, while this seems a little simplistic, it's a great way to remember the 3 G's, the three ways to remember the main motivations of explorers, and we're going to talk about each one of those. The first was gold. Now, some people think it's actually gold bars, and yes, they did like gold because it was a valuable mineral, but really anything, they were trading silk, they were trading spices, they were trading anything that could make them money. So it wasn't necessarily gold. It was the idea behind the money they could make by trading, and controlling those trade routes would equal gold to them, money. Foreign spices were desired because Europeans had no refrigeration. So Europeans wanted these spices, and again, those were located in the Spice Island, which was Indonesia currently today. Some of the other natural resources, timber, sugar, tobacco, ivory from other continents could be bought and sold, and they would make a nice profit as well. So again, we're not just speaking about gold. For the most part, it was a lot of other things besides gold that were making these empires wealthy. So anybody that controlled the trade routes, those were the empires that were the wealthiest. So control of trade routes meant power and money. Ta-da! Gold and natural resources. European merchants knew that if they could trade directly with people from Asia, they could make enormous profits. So around the 1400s, Europeans began looking for a sea route to Asia. The other idea that came out of this time period was the Renaissance and the idea of humanism. This was the focus on individuals. People believed that, hey, we can achieve anything if we set our mind to it. The human is quite capable. And with all these ideas on human achievement and emphasis on what humans can achieve, gave rise to different inventions and collaborating with ideas. And there was a rise of a lot of different inventions and innovations in this time period. One of them was the printing press. Then ideas could easily be spread because it wasn't just word of mouth. We could actually read it in paper and mass produce those ideas. individual kings wanted glory. So for them, it wasn't just the riches, although that was part of it. The empire that had the most and made the most wealth also became the most famous. So that was the idea behind glory. It's kind of the pride and the ego behind glory. So glory is more land, more resources, more powerful kingdoms equals ta-da, glory. So that's the idea behind glory. The last chi is God. Europeans believe that it was their duty and it was their responsibility to spread the Christian faith. And remember, at the time, it's not like modern day Europe now, where there was a lot of different religions. At the time, predominantly Europe was a Christian a faith religion. So Europe was mainly in the faith of Christians. They were looking at, mainly it was the Catholic Church that was dominant at that time. They also felt like it was their duty, once they could explore these lands, to convert the native people. Well, that sounds good in theory. Sometimes it wasn't, because they forced their beliefs and culture onto people that were unwilling to do that and accept that. So that's the negative to this idea of missionary. Okay, so let's talk about some of the travels. These ships, they oftentimes had no idea how long it would take them. So they get out on the water and they thought, well, it would take them weeks. They were gone for months. They would run out of food, and definitely fresh food. Again, there wasn't a great way to keep and preserve their food. They ate a lot of biscuits and hardtack, which is, sometimes they'd go gotten rotten. They would get maggots in them. Rats were on the boat. It was really just, if you read what it says, the ox's hide were covered, that covered the top of the main yard, had become exceedingly hard because of the sun, rain, and wind. And basically, they were really ill-equipped and unprepared for the daunting task of the journey that they had to take. And while they thought it was short, it ended up being a lot longer. And they oftentimes would have to eat the rodents that were on the ship with them. So, the crew oftentimes weren't as willing as the captain on the ship to be willing participants in this, because of the awful conditions with which they were sailing in. All right, so you've got God, glory, and gold. Okay, and those are kind of the three motivations for the most part. If we can take some of those ideas, those are the three ideas behind exploration. Okay, so go ahead and fill out your organizer. You can go back and listen to it again, stop it where you need to, but that's basically what you need to understand for exploration.